So, hello and welcome this afternoon to this webinar on what is eco-anxiety for young people and what helps in school. It's going to last probably just over 30 minutes. And just to welcome you all, first of all, and my name is Hannah Togneri, and I'm a newly qualified EP working in South Wales. And I've got a long-standing interest in the environment and climate change. But as a kind of new EP and kind of coming into the area of educational psychology, what I did find was that it was quite difficult to find where the environment and climate change was being acted on and how it was going to be kind of incorporated into kind of EP practice. So luckily, though, I've now found a number of other psychologists who now share this interest and the kind of drive in finding out what our kind of role might be in this area. And this webinar is really part of a collection now of ones on climate and the environment by EPs. There's previous ones by Aoife on nature connection, and Louise Edgington's done one on eco-anxiety and a focus on self-care. And there's an upcoming one by Rob Lee as well, sharing his research. So I hope this kind of webinar this afternoon is going to complement those, and just to let you know that they're available if this is something you want to delve into a little more. So the work I'm going to be using today to kind of reflect on this, on eco-anxiety for young people, what helps in school, is from my thesis research. So this involved action research with young people and who I'm calling their supportive adults, so which essentially was leaders and teachers in their school. And this idea really of finding others with this kind of interest and concern for the environment. So for myself, finding other educational psychologists. But this idea is also something at the heart of this piece of work with young people. So to set the scene really for this webinar, I've chosen two images that the young people drew to illustrate this. So we have, this is the first one, and this is the second one. And for me, they talk about moving from a position of feeling very alone and caring about the environment to finding others who care. And I'm just going to change the author there at the bottom to include and acknowledge my co-researchers. So the young people are there across the top. They were 14 and 15 years old when I had the pleasure of working with them, all girls. And then we have the pseudonyms of the staff there as well. So all pseudonyms for them. Okay. So just to give a little overview, I'm going to unpack some of the background research first, because it's going to be useful to understand that context. Then I'm going to talk through what we did in practice, then look at that kind of the approach that I used. And then I'm going to talk about the findings and implications from that to really think about what, might help in school. And I can't do justice to everything in this kind of half an hour session, but I have tried to give some references as I go along. So if you're anything like me, when this is on YouTube, you'll go along and you'll pause it at that moment and scribble them down. So first to some of that background. In countries like Wales, where I work, in the UK kind of more broadly, one of the ways that we experience climate change and other kind of environmental challenges is often vicariously. So exposure through news and social media, but actually research suggests that kind of viewers can be affected as deeply in this way as seeing destruction occurring firsthand. I'll give you the reference there. Though of course things are changing. And there's a lot more linking in the media now between flooding, for instance, and climate change. And the predictions are that we're going to be experiencing a lot more of these first-hand impacts. And studies have shown a really high level of concern from young people, with many worried about the state of the planet, the impact of climate change on their lives, and broader environmental kind of concerns as well, such as plastic waste and litter as well. And I really wanted to share this tweet. This is from 2021. And the reason is, I think it makes a really important point that this is something real that's happening in our world. And, what can you say without lying? So how do we talk about this with and support children and young people? And there appear to be particular challenges for children and young people with eco-anxiety. So research suggests this stems from not feeling listened to, not feeling powerful enough to create change, and also feelings of distrust for adults as well. What have they been doing really? Adolescents seem to be the most concerned group, and this might be because they've got a better understanding of the threat, and that's suggested by Maria Ojala, who's done a lot of work in this area. And they're also being asked to make decisions about their future, suggests Latonen and Piccola. So, they think at a point in their lives where they're considering, themselves in relation to their future and what's going on in the world. But, how do we describe these feelings or responses, and what words do we use, and what do we mean by these words? There are a lot of different terms here that I've shared to do with eco-anxiety or related terms. So we have the American Psychological Association giving this definition of a chronic fear of environmental doom. However, lots of the other writers and researchers in this area point out loads of different feelings, and actually quite changeable feelings as well. So fear, worry, anger, frustration, despair, guilt, shame, and grief. And Randall prefers the term climate distress to kind of distinguish it's not just anxiety, and we might have climate anxiety to talk about that particular part of that concern to do with climate change. Kevorkian gives us this term environmental grief. So that's ongoing loss and grief relating to the natural world, such as the loss of ecosystems, animal life, plant life. And we have solastalgia that Albrecht talks about. So that's pain at the physical desolation of home. So meaning that those normal feelings of solace that perhaps you might find in a home setting, home environment, can't be found there. And then Verley kind of talks about this far more in a kind of physical, visceral kind of way as a response. So it's embodied and affective experiences that may not easily be named or understood as emotions. And Hickman, who's then quite key in this area, then suggests that eco-anxiety could be understood as dysregulated eco-empathy. And the key thing here is that suggesting that eco-anxiety responses might be thought of as resulting actually from caring about the natural world. And for me, this kind of suggests a lack of consensus on a definition at present. However, in general in the literature, the thinking is that eco-anxiety is not a mental illness or a disorder, but actually can be a healthy response to ecological threat. And I would direct you to the Climate Psychology Alliance there and look at their web pages if you'd like to find out a little bit more about that. And this is why Hickman has suggested really changing the focus from eco-anxiety to ideas connected with awakening and awareness. So we become aware of this kind of threat in our worlds. And that's why bottom left there, you've got these other terms, eco-awareness, eco-care, eco-awakening. So there are different kind of options in the language that we could choose to use. Some references for you there. And so I have stuck with eco-anxiety for now because it seems to be a term that's out there, and so people have an idea what this might be about. But just drawing together all those different ideas from all those different researchers and different thinkers, this is then what I'm meaning when I'm talking about it at the moment. So it's this term that encompasses these many changing and difficult emotions and experiences that this growing awareness of these real threats from the climate environmental crises can create. And I got really interested in, what is it, though, particularly for young people? And do we know anything that helps children and young people already? We do, but there's not actually a lot of studies focused at all on children and people supporting them with eco-anxiety in schools. So there is, though, quite a bit of growing literature about supporting protest groups, including youth strikers, so those kind of school strike for climate, or inspired by Greta Thunberg since 2018, and also some studies from adults as well. I'm not gonna unpack them in great detail, but I will give you the references, okay? So there are these key ideas, all right? The first one is being with feelings. So not trying to soothe or heal the feelings and responses of eco-anxiety, but giving support to enable people to process the strong emotions. Then we have cognitive reappraisal and having trust in others. That really is focusing on the work of Ajala and something called meaning-focused coping that she writes about. And that's where climate change is acknowledged, but you can positively reappraise to find a bright side, activate hope and trust in others to act. And Pakala also draws here on the work of Bion and applies it in this context to kind of look at binocular vision and seeing the positive actions as well as the negative. Taking action is really well established as helping, but particularly if it's a collective experience, because you don't want to be left holding that difficulty and that responsibility for change alone. And feeling some agency is really important. I'm going to put the references up there, and the one for agency is a lovely study of Polish young protesters organising their own protest and how important it was to have that voice and decision making in an adult-free space. But there do seem to be some challenges applying these ideas into schools. So young people appear to have some difficult encounters with environmental education. There's also difficulties in supporting collaborative action, difficulties finding space in the curriculum, and a lack of facilities to support whole school sustainability. So it's quite, imagine what the pupils would look out and see within their kind of school environment, and it might not look particularly environmentally friendly. But it's tricky because, there haven't been very many studies kind of in situ in schools. And then what about support from adults? Well, the literature suggests that young people really need support from powerful adults to help them. I'll direct you to Walker's study in a minute. And in schools, teachers are those potential supportive adults, but there are difficulties. It's a bit of a political topic still, or very much. And, there's kind of conflict for leaders, particularly about taking action because of other kind of duties and responsibilities to do with attendance and outcomes. So this really led me to wonder, as Walker's reference, about how can we support young people in school and how can we really enable that adult support? So this is what we did. So I really wanted to do a piece of research that involved listening to young people, that involved participation in a school study, getting that kind of action and agency involved in it, and having some embedded support from more powerful others, so those supportive adults. So I designed a piece of action research, and I did this through a bespoke kind of version of cooperative inquiry that I just created for this piece of work, and which I just called linked cooperative inquiry because essentially we're linking together two separate inquiries. So cooperative inquiry in itself is a form of participatory action research, very much about researching with people, and forms kind of action and reflection cycles that you go through. And at the bottom there, I put a reference to Heron's book and a really accessible chapter by Riley and Reason that's really useful kind of as a starting point. So what I did was I had these two separate inquiries. We had one for young people and one for the adults in the school. So the young people, they were researching into their own situation, thinking about what eco-anxiety kind of is. We're exploring that really all the time, and what we could do that would help us. So I facilitated a group with a teacher from the school also joining us. And then at the end of our kind of action and reflection research kind of cycle, the young people then presented their findings to a group of the school staff, who then used this as the starting point for their own inquiry, wondering about how they could support them. So really how they could take on that identity as a supportive adult in school, which they then presented back to the young people in turn. So the linked cooperative inquiry kind of just adds this terminology of supportive adults to emphasize that need of support from more powerful others. It adds these feedback loops you can see there to have that built-in opportunities for young people's voices and for building a bit of collaboration between the groups too. But we wanted to keep them separate just to be aware of those power dynamics and give those young people a distinct space to explore their ideas first. So within the sessions then, I would facilitate sessions with activities for reflection and exploration. And at the end of the session, we then would collaboratively decide on our action that we would take before we met again. And at the next session, then we would reflect on the action and what we had learned from it. So for the young people, actions involved things like a school-wide questionnaire to the other pupils, an observation of the canteen recycling behaviour, conversations with teachers and parents. And this was supported where needed by that teacher from the school. And then they chose who they wanted to invite to their presentation, including the head teacher. And then the presentation took the form of letters. They wrote to the head teacher and then they read them aloud to her. So what did we find out? So like other research, eco-anxiety for these young people was a real and scary and difficult to bear environmental knowing. So it was the realness of climate change alongside an idea really of an existential threat that was really difficult knowledge to hold. But they also had concerns that were broader environmental worries. So animals, habitats, plastic pollution, and global environmental events too. And you might be able to see Bobby's artwork there that illustrates some of this area that they were also thinking about. Different types of loss were also evoked. So loss of environmental places in general, but also loss of known places, a little bit like solastalgia. Sarah reflected on the changes that she'd observed in somewhere she used to live. And there was also loss of an imagined future life. So they compared their lives to the lives of their parents. And we have Ray here reflecting really on, the sadness and jealousy that she would not get her parents' full life now she knew about climate change. And they, as a group, really grappled with their expectations of what life would be like for them. So Daisy brought in some timelines that she'd found in the news that made it really real and scary, but also as they talked about when they would see visible change in their lifetime, the meaning that they took from these climate timelines was potentially quite different to the meaning that I might take as an adult, and perhaps the meaning that an older adult might take also. So there's this potential generational difference in how one might understand climate change within one's lifetime, which also has the implication that we really need to talk to young people and listen to find out their experience and the meaning they're taking. The moment they found out, they reflected on, and it was this suddenness and unpleasantness, like a bomb. They described it really powerful, but it was also an ongoing process of exploring how they related to climate change and what was going on in the environment. So this ongoing processing also has implications for how we need to support young people too in this area. So holding all that difficult knowing of all that really hard stuff, they then saw this limited interest and care in the responses of others in different spheres of their lives. So political, social media, their school, their peers. We have this harmful media. Ray describes it as a cesspool in the comments there. These dismissive public responses and worrying stories. That's quite a noisy place, but then we seem to have also this education silence. So they reflected on the fact that they hadn't been taught about climate change, and they wondered why it's something this important they hadn't been told about. And climate just felt like it was ignored and at the bottom of the list, both in the media, the political world, and at school. And there was a social cost for them. So they described being made fun of, experiencing derision, and they didn't always want to share their interests because of worries about friends' and peers' reactions. Friends felt it was too negative to be talked about, And Sarah reflected that she, that sense of difference, and that she just felt weird that she was interested in this. And so it made it hard to hold this open, environmentally caring identity as a young person in their school. And that was lonely for them. And on top of that, they felt really limited power. So I'm just a student, they reflected. We don't have control of the steering wheel. But then what helped? Okay, I'm going to start with the young person's group, and particularly for them, what was helpful. So a really big thing was the sense of belonging that developed, and a sense of finding others who cared. And this was talked about by all the young co-researchers. So I show you Sarah's comment here. She recounts the moment she walked into the classroom for the first time that we met in, and began to discover that there were others who felt the same way. And so in our group that we had, it became a place they could take on a visible environmentalist identity. So they connected with their group, but also their peers when they sent the questionnaire around to everybody, and they found out, oh gosh, some of them do care as well. They connected with the staff group, the interaction with them, and the kind of school as a whole in the conversations they had with their head teacher. And so she was able to tell them her environmental hopes for the school and what she wanted to do. And knowing people who were in power, as it were, in their school, and that they cared, was really important. And so with these connections, they can kind of be seen as being held really, or contained in this network of others who also care, which really reflects what Sarah says about being surrounded there by all the great people who care. Knowing about solutions was really important for them, and they directly connected that to their kind of well-being and a sense of hope. And it's important here, the implication really that schools need to share what they're doing to support the environment with their pupils. They used talk in a really important way, both to express it, because they said we need to talk about it. And they did, and they struggled with and broke apart difficult ideas in the group, but it seemed to be a safe place to do this, okay? And they commented on it supporting their well-being, and calming to speak about, therapeutic, and relieving that there were people who understood. But it was also an ongoing process, and they expressed that they needed going over. And those multiple sessions allowed us to explore ideas over time and come back to that. And finally, for the young people, there was the impact of the cooperative inquiry itself, because they, of course, were co-researchers and able to kind of influence the direction of the inquiry. So they chose their own actions between sessions. It was Bobby who suggested that they write to the head teacher. And in fact, they expressed a real sense of power after having spoken to her, actually saying, I feel more powerful now. And that kind of seemed to continue after the inquiry, with one of them running for Welsh Youth Parliament and someone else hosting their own radio show on the topic of the environment. And then the adults and kind of what we can learn from them. It was difficult. These were kind of teachers and leaders in their secondary school. So obviously there were time pressures and work pressures. But identifying, what they were already doing well was really important for them. And starting to create change within their own department microclimates. So they looked, for instance, at how they could add related text into the English curriculum, for instance. The new Welsh curriculum was identified as having some really good possibilities for integration of climate across the curriculum and embedding some action. So they actually designed a new scheme of work, which had local action embedded as a part of it. And we also thought about the emotional responses to climate change and how space for this might be given actually in lessons, thinking about the value that the young people are given that in our group. But we still have some ongoing questions about how this might work at a class level and whether this space would be safe enough. And then looking at kind of what happened with them together and bringing those groups kind of together. So the key thing here is partnerships and powerful allies. So the young people co-researchers needed allies in the staff who are more powerful than them. They valued staff who could support them to act, but also who could help them voice their beliefs and support access to different parts of the school system. So for example, being able to send a questionnaire link around all the parents in the school so the children could fill it out. So obviously, there's some big limitations to this. It's one study, in one school with 2 inquiry groups, but there's some useful stuff I think that we can take away and think about how we want to work in schools. So firstly, thinking then about that the really difficult stuff about the realness of climate change, the existential threat, that anticipated loss. But we're going to give some safe spaces to explore and voice concerns. So could be a group like we did for young people who care about the environment. It should probably have some emotional check-ins as part of that structure. And we did find that having an EP there and a member of staff was useful because you got that dual knowledge of somebody who can kind of contain the group and has experience with that. And certainly in this case, a staff member who had really good knowledge on the environment. It's not about finding immediate solutions, that's really important, I think, but about giving space to the feelings, the knowing and experience, and then supporting the group to explore possible strategies. And crucially, this is an ongoing thing, not just a kind of a one-off event. Then those feelings of limited power that they were talking about that were really difficult. This is about creating connections with school staff because they can become supportive adults for these young people. They're going to give them that access to the system. They're able to work in partnership with them. And it's important as well to create space and perhaps invite a different way of relating with staff. Okay, so to increase the sense of efficacy and power for the young people and connection with the adults as well. So we can do things like thinking about the language we're using for children in this group and for all the group, adults and children alike. So whether it's co-group members, co-researchers, think about feedback from young people to adults, common interests and goals, showing they really value the response to the young people, giving more space to the young people's words, and consider that room layout. So it's not a traditional classroom. So thinking about circles of chairs, thinking about collaborative sort of table spaces with all pushed together. So it's ready to work as a kind of more collaboratively. Then thinking about the difficulty of that lack of education on climate change. Well, first of all, we're going to need to learn about climate change and give some opportunities to learn about solutions so they know they can actually do something. School-based solutions are really important as there may be some stuff there already in place, but it's important to reflect with staff about whether environmental school actions are actually communicated with pupils and to ask pupils, do they know what the school's doing to find out if that communication is working? And it's also key then to look at the possibilities of embedded local school action within the curriculum too. And then feeling alone in being environmentally caring. So first of all here, I think we really need to acknowledge that these non-abstract others are also worried. And this is really important to the young people, that it wasn't just others are worried, but they really wanted to know who it might be. So other students in school, myself, other members of staff. And we need to create those opportunities for connections with others so that they have that network of others really who also care. So that could be with a small group of like-minded peers. It could be with those supportive adults in connection there. It might be reaching out to the school, the other peers in the school in a wider sense, and also the value really of talking to senior leadership to get the idea of the whole school vision that hopefully is there. And so to end, I wanted to share these words from Sarah, one of my co-researchers, and these were words she wrote to her head teacher, and they seem fitting to kind of ask you as well. So she said this: you can make a change for the better future, better tomorrow. So now I'm asking, what will you do? And I just invite you to take a moment to reflect on perhaps what this doing might be for you. For me, it doesn't mean that I hold this responsibility alone, but it's with and alongside others. And part of that for me is reaching out to you. So you are those potential supportive adults for young people in schools, educational psychologists, school staff. So I wonder, as supportive adults, what more we can do. And if you would like to add any reflections in the chat, you're very welcome to do so. Or if you have any questions that you want to put in the Q&A box, please do so. And what I shall do is stop sharing my screen. And I will come out and see if there are any reflections that anybody does want to share in the chat. Oh, thank you. I can see all the links there to other upcoming ones. Question about whether the young people are carrying on the work we started. I certainly went back into the school, and there was certainly some talk when I left about the staff group and the young people kind of planning some joint actions together. I'm now not aware of where they've got to now. I know the staff have continued then to work on their scheme of work that they're doing, so they're continuing to put that into place, and I think it'll be really interesting to kind of reflect with them about what might happen, in the future, and the kind of impact of that will be really interesting to see. So yes, just with the kind of reflections on young people's voices there. That's brilliant. I'm just going to check the Q&A and see if there's anything in there. It's really interesting. So Aoife's asked about the idea about whether or not the young people's kind of concern about the climate was kind of seen as niche among their fellow students. And I think what's really interesting is that what my findings are a bit different. There's not a lot of research out there, but it was a little bit different. There's another study from New Zealand, where it seemed to kind of didn't matter so much, that they didn't feel so alone. So this was quite different, actually. And maybe this is a kind of more of a UK-based context. I don't know. And I think it's very interesting, and to be really interested, to encourage others to do some more research into this, to see what else really we can find out. I think it's a kind of a new area we can explore. Lovely. Okay. Any plans to share with other wide audience? I don't know. But I'd be very interested in linking with anybody else who's exploring in this area, because I think the more we're talking about it, the better that's got to be. Lovely. So I guess if there are no other comments or questions at this stage, that's brilliant. And thank you very much for your time this afternoon. And I hope you have a lovely evening.